Picture this. You're 17 years old and you've never used a telephone. You've never driven a car, watched television, or even flipped a light switch. Your entire world consists of a few hundred people who dress exactly like you, speak the same dialect, and follow rules so strict that a single misstep could mean losing your family forever. Now imagine making the choice to leave all of that behind, knowing that the moment you walk away, everyone you've ever loved will turn their backs on you as if you never existed. This is the reality for thousands of young Amish men and women who face an impossible decision every year. Stay in the only world they've ever known, or step into a modern society that might as well be another planet. Some call it freedom, others call it exile, but for those who've lived it, there's only one word that truly captures the experience: terrifying. Tonight, we're going to take you inside one of America's most secretive communities and share the untold stories of those brave enough to escape. These aren't just tales of people leaving a religious group. These are stories of survival, of courage, and of the devastating price of choosing your own path. You'll hear from men and women who risked everything for a chance at a different life, and discover why their journeys out of the Amish world are filled with more danger and heartbreak than you could ever imagine. The Amish community has existed in America over 3 centuries, building a way of life so different from mainstream society that it seems almost impossible in our connected digital world. With their horse-drawn buggies, plain clothes, and rejection of modern technology, they've created what many see as a peaceful, simple existence. But beneath this serene exterior lies a complex web of rules, traditions, and social pressures that can make leaving feel like an act of rebellion against God Himself. What drives someone to abandon everything they've ever known? What happens when you've never learned to drive, never had a bank account, never even seen a movie, and suddenly you're thrust into a world of smartphones, social media, and endless choices? And perhaps most importantly, what are the Amish community leaders so afraid of that they're willing to permanently exile their own children to keep them from sharing their stories? The answers to these questions reveal a side of Amish life that few outsiders ever see. It's a world where questioning authority can lead to public humiliation, where falling in love with the wrong person can result in banishment, and where the very act of seeking education or independence can be seen as a betrayal of everything sacred. For those who choose to leave, the journey isn't just about adapting to modern life, it's about surviving the complete destruction of their identity and finding the strength to rebuild themselves from nothing.
To understand why escaping the Amish world is so terrifying, we first need to understand what that world really looks like from the inside. The Amish didn't just accidentally create an isolated society. Every aspect of their community is carefully designed to keep members close to home and discourage contact with the outside world. This isn't simply about religious beliefs or lifestyle choices. It's about control, conformity, and the systematic suppression of individual desires that might threaten the community's stability. The Amish trace their roots back to 16th century Europe, where they emerged from the Anabaptist movement during the Protestant Reformation. Unlike other Christian denominations, the Anabaptists believed that baptism should only occur when a person is old enough to make a conscious choice about their faith. This belief put them at odds with both Catholic and Protestant authorities, leading to centuries of persecution, torture, and execution. The survivors fled to America in waves, starting in the early 1700s, seeking the religious freedom that Europe had denied them. But the persecution they faced in Europe left deep scars in Amish culture that persist to this day. Having seen their ancestors killed for their beliefs, the Amish developed an intense fear of outside influence and a determination to preserve their way of life at any cost. They established the principle of separation from the world, which they call Gelassenheit, meaning submission to God's will and rejection of worldly pride and ambition. Over time, this principle evolved into something far more restrictive than simple religious devotion. Today's Amish communities operate under a set of unwritten rules called the Ordning, which governs every aspect of daily life, from the color of clothing to the style of haircuts, from acceptable occupations to approved methods of transportation. These rules aren't suggestions or guidelines, they're absolute requirements, and violating them can result in punishment, public confession, or ultimately excommunication and shunning. The Ordnung varies between different Amish communities, but certain elements remain consistent across all groups. Technology is severely restricted, with most communities forbidding electricity, automobiles, telephones, and even bicycles. Education is limited to 8th grade, with higher learning viewed as unnecessary and potentially dangerous. Marriage must occur within the community, and couples are expected to submit to arranged matches approved by church elders. Women have few rights and are expected to remain subservient to their husbands and fathers throughout their lives. But perhaps the most powerful tool for maintaining control is the practice of shunning, known as Meidung in Pennsylvania German. When someone violates the Ordnung or chooses to leave the community, they become invisible to their former friends and family. Parents refuse to speak to their own children. Siblings act as if their brother or sister never existed. Even spouses may be required to cut all contact with their partner if they're deemed to have strayed from the faith.
This isn't temporary punishment or a cooling-off period. Shunning is designed to be permanent and absolute. The person being shunned cannot eat meals with their family, conduct business with community members, or receive any form of help or support from the people who once claimed to love them. The message is clear: conform or be erased. For children growing up in this environment, the outside world becomes a source of both fascination and terror. They're taught from birth that modern society is evil, corrupt, and dangerous. Public schools are portrayed as places where children lose their souls. Television and movies are described as tools of Satan. Even innocent interactions with non-Amish neighbors are viewed with suspicion and discouraged. The goal is to make the outside world seem so frightening and alien that no rational person would ever want to leave the safety and security of the Amish community. Yet despite these efforts, young people continue to leave. Some are drawn by curiosity about the modern world they've been forbidden to explore. Others are fleeing abusive situations or oppressive restrictions they can no longer tolerate. Still others fall in love with someone outside the community or develop ambitions that can't be fulfilled within the constraints of Amish life. Whatever their reasons, they all face the same impossible choice: either submit to a life they don't want or lose their family forever. The decision to leave rarely happens overnight. For most Amish young people, it's a gradual process that begins with small acts of rebellion and builds over time into an overwhelming need for freedom. It might start with secretly listening to a radio, hiding forbidden books, or sneaking out to meet non-Amish friends. Each act of defiance brings both the thrill of independence and the crushing weight of guilt and fear. Take Sarah, whose real name we've changed to protect her identity. Growing up in a conservative Amish community in Pennsylvania, She was expected to follow the traditional path of every Amish woman: finish school at 14, help with household duties until marriage, then spend her adult life bearing children and serving her husband. But Sarah had other dreams. She wanted to become a nurse, to help people, to use her mind for something more than calculating how many jars of preserves to put up for winter. When Sarah first mentioned her desire for higher education to her parents, their reaction was swift and harsh. Her father reminded her that pride was the deadliest sin, and that women who sought education above their station were placing themselves above God's plan. Her mother warned her that nurses worked in hospitals full of sick and dying people, exposing themselves to suffering that God might have intended as punishment for sin. The community elders made it clear that any young woman who pursued nursing would be viewed as rebellious and unmarriageable. But Sarah's desire for education only grew stronger as she got older. She began sneaking books from the local library, hiding them in the barn, and reading by candlelight after everyone else was asleep. She learned about diseases and treatments, about anatomy and physiology, about a world of knowledge that existed far beyond the boundaries of her small community. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she didn't know and how much she wanted to learn.
When Sarah turned 18, her parents began pressuring her to accept marriage proposals from young men in the community. The prospect of spending her life as someone's wife and nothing more became unbearable. She made secret contact with an organization that helps Amish people transition to modern life and began planning her escape. The process took months of careful preparation, gathering documents, learning about life outside the community, and building the courage to abandon everything she'd ever known. The night Sarah finally left, she took nothing but a few pieces of clothing and what little money she'd managed to save from selling eggs. She couldn't take family photos because the Amish don't allow photographs. She couldn't take sentimental items because she owned nothing that wasn't communal property. She couldn't even take a phone number to call home because her family didn't have a phone. She simply walked away from her house in the middle of the night, knowing that she might never see her parents, siblings, or childhood friends again. What Sarah didn't expect was how terrifying the outside world would actually be. Despite months of preparation, nothing had truly prepared her for the sensory overload of modern life, the constant noise of traffic, the overwhelming choices in every store, the complex social interactions required for even simple tasks like ordering food or asking for directions. She had no credit history, no work experience that translated to modern employment, and no understanding of how basic systems like banks, insurance, or government services actually worked. More devastating than the practical challenges was the emotional trauma of complete social isolation. Sarah had gone from being part of a tight-knit community where everyone knew her name and her family's history to being completely anonymous in a world of strangers. The loneliness was crushing. She would lie awake at night wondering if her mother was worried about her, if her father was angry, if her younger siblings missed her, or had already been told to forget she ever existed. The psychological impact of leaving the Amish extends far beyond simple homesickness or culture shock. Many former Amish individuals struggle with what psychologists recognize as complex trauma, resulting from years of psychological control, emotional manipulation, and the sudden severing of all family relationships. They often experience symptoms similar to those seen in survivors of cults or abusive relationships: depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and a persistent sense that they've made a terrible mistake. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who has spent years working with former Amish individuals, explains that the trauma begins long before someone actually leaves the community.
Children who question the rules or express interest in the outside world are often subjected to intense psychological pressure designed to break their will and force conformity. They might be publicly humiliated during church services, isolated from their peers, or subjected to harsh physical punishment disguised as religious discipline.
The threat of shunning hangs over every interaction within the community, creating an atmosphere of constant fear and surveillance. Children learn early that expressing doubts, asking too many questions, or showing interest in forbidden activities could result in losing everything they hold dear. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, where individuals become so afraid of the consequences of independent thought that they stop trying to think for themselves at all. When someone does finally work up the courage to leave, they're immediately cut off from every source of emotional support they've ever known. Unlike people who leave other religious communities, former Amish can't maintain contact with sympathetic family members or gradually transition away from their old life. The break is immediate, complete, and designed to be permanent. They must simultaneously grieve the loss of their entire family while trying to build a completely new identity in an unfamiliar world. The practical challenges of escaping are equally daunting. Most Amish children receive only an 8th grade education, leaving them woefully unprepared for modern employment. They've never learned to drive, never used a computer, never filled out a job application or opened a bank account. Simple tasks that most people take for granted become overwhelming obstacles when you've never encountered them before. Finding housing presents its own challenges as well. Without credit history, references from employers, or family members willing to co-sign leases, many former Amish find themselves sleeping in shelters, cars, or unsafe situations with strangers who promise help but have their own agendas. Women are particularly vulnerable during this transition period, as they often have even fewer practical skills and resources than their male counterparts. Employment opportunities are severely limited for people with 8th grade educations and no work experience in modern industries. Many former Amish find themselves working in factories, restaurants, or other low-paying jobs that barely provide enough income to survive. The dream of education and career advancement that motivated their escape often seems impossibly distant when they're struggling to afford rent and groceries. But perhaps the most insidious challenge facing former Amish is the constant doubt about whether they've made the right choice. The community they left behind continues to thrive without them, while their new life is filled with struggle, loneliness, and uncertainty. Church leaders and family members who occasionally make contact don't hesitate to remind them that their suffering is proof that they've chosen the wrong path, that God is punishing them for their rebellion, and that their only hope for happiness is to confess their sins and return to the fold.
This psychological warfare is particularly effective because it exploits the deep-seated beliefs about sin, punishment, and divine judgment that were instilled from birth. Even former Amish who intellectually reject their childhood religious teachings often find themselves wondering if their struggles are indeed evidence of God's displeasure. The combination of practical hardships and spiritual doubts creates a powerful urge to give up and return to the community, even knowing that doing so means abandoning their dreams and accepting a life of submission and regret. Some do return. The Amish have a formal process for welcoming back those who have strayed, but it requires public confession, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and acceptance of whatever punishment the church elders deem appropriate. Those who return after leaving must prove their commitment to the community through years of perfect behavior, and they're often subjected to extra scrutiny and suspicion for the rest of their lives. Their experience in the outside world is seen as contamination that must be carefully monitored to prevent it from spreading to others. But many refuse to give up despite the overwhelming challenges they face. These survivors developed incredible resilience and determination as they slowly build new lives from nothing. They learn to navigate modern society through trial and error, often making costly mistakes along the way. They form new relationships with people who have no understanding of their background, but offer the friendship and support that their birth families have withdrawn. They pursue the education and careers that were forbidden in their old life, often achieving remarkable success despite their late start. The stories of these survivors are both heartbreaking and inspiring. They reveal the incredible courage it takes to choose an unknown future over a predictable but suffocating past. They also expose the harsh realities of a religious community that claims to value family and faith above all else, yet is willing to destroy both when members seek to think and choose for themselves. Mark's story illustrates both the terror and the triumph of escaping the Amish. Growing up in a conservative community in Ohio, Mark showed an early aptitude for mathematics and science that his teachers recognized but couldn't nurture within the constraints of Amish education. He was fascinated by how things worked, constantly asking questions about machinery, electricity, and the natural world that his elders either couldn't or wouldn't answer. When Mark expressed interest in continuing his education beyond 8th grade, his father's reaction was violent and immediate. Higher education was seen as a direct challenge to the community's authority and a sign of dangerous pride. Mark was forbidden to ask questions, required to work longer hours in the family business, and subjected to increasingly harsh punishments for any sign of intellectual curiosity. The breaking point came when Mark was caught with a library book about engineering that he borrowed during a rare trip to town. His father burned the book in front of the entire family and announced that Mark would be closely watched to prevent any further contamination from worldly knowledge. The message was clear: conform completely or face escalating consequences.
Mark began planning his escape immediately. Unlike Sarah, who had access to outside resources and support networks, Mark had to figure out everything on his own. He had no idea how to contact organizations that helped former Amish, no understanding of how to apply for jobs or housing, and no money saved for his transition. What he did have was an unshakable determination to pursue the education that had been denied to him. On a cold February night, Mark simply started walking. He had no destination in mind, no plan beyond getting as far away from his community as possible before anyone noticed he was gone. He walked for hours through rural roads, knowing that if anyone spotted him before he reached the highway, he would be brought back to face punishment that would make his father's previous anger seem mild by comparison. When Mark finally reached a town large enough to have a bus station, he used the small amount of money he'd managed to save to buy a ticket to the nearest city. He had no idea what he would do when he got there. No contacts or resources waiting for him. He simply knew that whatever challenges awaited him in the modern world, they had to be better than the intellectual suffocation he was escaping. The first months of Mark's new life were a nightmare of poverty, confusion, and crushing loneliness. He slept in homeless shelters, worked whatever jobs he could find, and spent every free moment at the public library trying to educate himself about the world he'd entered. He faced discrimination from employers who saw his lack of education and work history as signs of laziness or incompetence. He struggled with basic social interactions, having never learned the informal communication styles that most people take for granted. But Mark also discovered something that had been missing from his Amish life: hope. Every book he read, every new skill he learned, every small step forward in his education felt like a victory over the forces that had tried to keep him ignorant and subservient. The knowledge that he was forbidden from pursuing in his old life became his lifeline in his new one. It took Mark 5 years of working during the day and studying at night to earn his high school equivalency degree. It took another 8 years of part-time college courses, student loans, and relentless determination to earn a degree in engineering. The day he graduated, he thought about his father's angry words about pride and worldly achievement and realized that his education wasn't about pride at all. It was about fulfilling the potential that God had given him, potential that his community had tried to bury in the name of religious obedience. Mark's success story is inspiring, but it shouldn't overshadow the enormous cost of his achievement. He missed his father's funeral because he wasn't notified that his father was ill. He has never met his nieces and nephews who have been taught that he doesn't exist. His mother walks past him on the street during his rare visits to his hometown, her eyes fixed straight ahead as if he were invisible. The career success and financial security he achieved in the outside world came at the price of losing every relationship that had defined his childhood and adolescence.
This is the devil's bargain that every escaping Amish person must make. Freedom in exchange for family, individual achievement in exchange for community belonging, personal fulfillment in exchange for the comfort of never having to make difficult choices. For some, the trade is worth it. For others, the price is too high to bear. The stories become even more complex when we consider the experiences of Amish women who choose to leave. In most Amish communities, women have even fewer rights and opportunities than men. They're expected to remain silent in church, submit to their husband's authority in all matters, and find fulfillment solely through domestic duties and childbearing. Women who question these restrictions or express desires for independence face not only religious condemnation, but also the loss of any hope for marriage and family within the community. Rebecca's escape from her Amish community in Indiana began not with dreams of education or career success, but with a desperate need to protect herself and her children from an abusive husband. In the Amish world, divorce is forbidden under any circumstances, and women who complain about their husband's treatment are often told that their suffering is God's will and that their duty is to submit and pray for strength to endure. Her husband had begun hitting her shortly after their wedding, but when she sought help from church elders, they told her that she must have done something to provoke his anger. They suggested that she examine her own behavior, pray for forgiveness for whatever sins had caused the problem, and work harder to be the submissive wife that God required. When the abuse escalated to include their young children, Rebecca realized that staying in the community meant condemning her children to the same cycle of violence and helplessness that she had endured. Leaving meant not only abandoning her extended family and community, but also kidnapping her own children in the eyes of Amish law. Her husband had absolute authority over the family, and taking the children without his permission was seen as theft. Rebecca knew that if she was caught before reaching safety, she would lose custody of her children and face serious legal consequences. Even if she successfully escaped, she would be branded as a criminal and child stealer by everyone she had ever known. The night of their escape, Rebecca packed a few clothes for herself and her 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 8. She had been secretly saving money from selling eggs and vegetables, but her total savings amounted to less than $200. She had no driver's license,
no understanding of how to rent an apartment or enroll her children in school, and no idea where they would sleep once they left their house.
What Rebecca did have was an unshakable determination to break the cycle of abuse that had defined her marriage and threatened to define her children's future. She carried her youngest child while the older ones walked beside her through the dark countryside, heading toward the bus station in the nearest town. Every sound made her heart race with fear that they were being followed, that her husband had discovered their absence and was coming to drag them back home. The transition to modern life was overwhelming for Rebecca, but even more challenging for her children. They had never been inside a public school, never watched television, never eaten food that didn't come from their own farm or community. The oldest child cried every night for weeks, begging to go home and see Daddy. The youngest developed severe anxiety and refused to sleep alone, terrified that the strange new world would swallow her up while she slept. Rebecca found work cleaning houses and offices, jobs that required no special training, but paid barely enough to afford a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood. She worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, often leaving her children alone while she cleaned office buildings late at night. The guilt of being unable to provide the stable home life she wanted for them was almost unbearable, especially when they asked why they couldn't see their grandparents or cousins anymore. But slowly, gradually, Rebecca began to see the benefits of their escape. Her children learned to read at levels far beyond what they would have achieved in Amish schools. Her daughter expressed interest in becoming a doctor, a dream that would have been immediately crushed in their old community. Her sons learned that men could help with household duties and that hitting was never an acceptable way to solve problems. Most importantly, they learned that they had choices about their futures, that they didn't have to accept whatever life was assigned to them by religious authorities. The price of these opportunities was the complete loss of extended family and community support. Rebecca's parents, siblings, and childhood friends all treated her as if she had died. Her children grew up without grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins. They had no family traditions, no cultural identity beyond her mother's stories about a place they could never return to. The freedom they had gained came with a profound sense of displacement and loss that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Rebecca's story highlights one of the most disturbing aspects of Amish shunning practices: the willingness to abandon children in order to maintain community control. Her parents chose loyalty to church rules over their relationship with their daughter and grandchildren. Her siblings chose conformity over compassion. The community that claimed to value family above all else proved that institutional control was actually more important than family bonds.
This pattern repeats itself in story after story of former Amish individuals. Parents who claim to love their children unconditionally proved that their love has very specific conditions. Communities that present themselves as havens of family values demonstrate that their true values are obedience, conformity, and control. The gap between public image and private reality becomes a source of deep psychological trauma for those who experience it firsthand. The emotional manipulation employed by Amish communities to prevent people from leaving goes far beyond simple religious teaching. It includes sophisticated psychological techniques designed to make independence seem impossible and dangerous. Children are raised with learned helplessness, taught that they're incapable of surviving outside the community and that even attempting to do so will result in damnation and eternal suffering. Former Amish consistently report being told that the outside world is filled with violence, drugs, sexual immorality, and spiritual corruption. They're taught that non-Amish people are untrustworthy, immoral, and actively seeking to destroy anyone who tries to leave the community. These lessons are reinforced through carefully selected examples of former Amish who struggled with addiction, mental illness, or other problems after leaving, with the clear implication that these problems were caused by their decision to abandon their faith, rather than by the trauma of forced exile and social isolation. The fear-based messaging is particularly effective because it contains just enough truth to seem credible. The outside world does have problems that don't exist in isolated Amish communities. There is more crime, more drug use, more family breakdown in mainstream society. What the messaging doesn't acknowledge is that these problems aren't inevitable consequences of leaving the Amish world, and that the Amish community has its own serious problems that are hidden from public view. Abuse, both physical and sexual, occurs in Amish communities just as it does in the outside world. But unlike mainstream society, Amish communities have no effective mechanisms for reporting abuse, prosecuting offenders, or protecting victims. The emphasis on forgiveness, submission, and community harmony often means that abusers are protected, while victims are encouraged to remain silent and endure their suffering as God's will. Mental illness is also poorly understood and inadequately treated within Amish communities. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions are often attributed to spiritual weakness or lack of faith, rather than recognized as medical conditions requiring professional treatment. Young people struggling with mental health issues may be subjected to increased religious pressure and community scrutiny rather than receiving the help they need. These hidden problems within Amish society rarely come to public attention because community members are discouraged from discussing internal issues with outsiders, and former members who might expose these problems are immediately discredited as bitter ex-members seeking revenge against their former community. This creates a public relations environment where the Amish can maintain their reputation as a peaceful, family-oriented society while their own members suffer in silence.
The systematic suppression of information about life inside Amish communities makes it nearly impossible for young people to make informed decisions about their futures. They're making choices about whether to stay or leave based on incomplete and heavily biased information. They know only what they've been told about the outside world, and they're forbidden from learning about alternatives to their current situation. This information control is maintained through multiple layers of restriction. Access to books, newspapers, radio, television, and the internet is severely limited or completely prohibited. Contact with non-Amish people is discouraged and monitored. Education is restricted to elementary levels, specifically to prevent exposure to ideas that might challenge community teachings. Even within the community, discussion of doubts, questions, or alternative viewpoints is strongly discouraged and may result in punishment. The result is a population of young adults who must make life-determining decisions while lacking the information necessary to make those decisions wisely. They're choosing between a familiar but restrictive lifestyle and a completely unknown alternative, with no opportunity to research, discuss, or gradually explore their options. The system is designed to make staying seem like the only rational choice, not because it's actually the best option, but because it's the only option that young people are allowed to understand fully. This manipulation becomes even more insidious when we consider the practice of Rumspringa, which is often misunderstood by outsiders as a period when Amish teenagers are free to explore the outside world before committing to baptism and lifelong membership in the community. In reality, Rumspringa is a carefully controlled experience designed to reinforce community teachings about the dangers of worldly life, rather than to provide genuine exploration of alternatives. During Rumspringa,
Teenagers may be allowed slightly more freedom in their dress and activities, but they remain living at home under their parents' supervision and subject to community scrutiny. They're not given information about educational opportunities, career possibilities, or resources for transitioning to mainstream society. Instead, they're deliberately exposed to the worst aspects of non-Amish culture. Parties involving heavy drinking, casual sexual encounters, and other behaviors that confirm their community's teachings about worldly corruption. The goal of Rumspringa is not to help young people make informed decisions about their futures, but to make them grateful for the safety and stability of Amish life. By the time they're expected to choose baptism, they've been convinced that the outside world is dangerous, immoral, and unsatisfying compared to the community they know. Those who still express doubts or resistance are subjected to increased pressure from family, friends, and church leaders until they conform or decide to leave.
For those who do choose to leave during or after Rumspringa, the consequences are swift and severe. Families who seemed supportive and understanding during the decision-making process immediately implement complete shunning. Young people who expected to maintain some contact with their families discover that even their parents will no longer speak to them. The message is clear. The community's tolerance for exploration and questioning was an illusion designed to facilitate manipulation, not genuine choice. This bait-and-switch approach causes profound psychological damage to young people who believed they were making decisions with their family's support and understanding. They discover too late that their parents' love was conditional on making the right choice, and that the community's apparent tolerance for questioning was actually a sophisticated form of entrapment. The betrayal they feel when shunning begins often compounds the trauma of exile and makes recovery even more difficult. The long-term effects of growing up in such a manipulative environment extend far beyond the immediate trauma of leaving. Former Amish often struggle with decision-making, having never learned to evaluate options and consequences independently. They may have difficulty with interpersonal relationships, having been taught that love and acceptance are always conditional on meeting others' expectations. They often battle perfectionism and people-pleasing behaviors, desperate to avoid the rejection they experienced when they chose to think for themselves. Trust becomes a major issue for many former Amish individuals. Having been systematically lied to about the outside world and manipulated by the people who claim to love them most, they struggle to believe that anyone might have their best interests at heart. This makes it difficult to form healthy relationships, seek help when needed, or take advantage of opportunities for growth and healing. The religious trauma experienced by former Amish is particularly complex because it involves not just leaving a faith tradition, but discovering that everything they were taught about God, morality, and spirituality was designed to control them, rather than genuinely guide them toward truth and fulfillment. Many former Amish go through periods of intense anger, grief, and spiritual confusion as they attempt to separate legitimate spiritual seeking from the manipulation they experienced in their childhood community. Some former Amish reject religion entirely, unable to distinguish between authentic spirituality and the coercive system they escaped. Others spend years exploring different faith traditions, trying to find spiritual communities that offer genuine love and acceptance rather than conditional approval based on conformity.
The healing process for former Amish individuals is complicated by the fact that mainstream counselors and therapists often lack understanding of the unique challenges they face. The combination of religious trauma, cultural displacement, Family rejection and practical life skills deficits creates a complex set of needs that few mental health professionals are equipped to address. Many former Amish struggle to find therapists who understand that their problems aren't simply about adjusting to modern life, but about recovering from systematic psychological abuse disguised as religious devotion. Support networks specifically for former Amish have developed over the past few decades, but they remain limited and often underfunded. Organizations like Amish Heritage Foundation and Mission to Amish People provide practical assistance and emotional support, but they can't fully replace the comprehensive community support that former members lost when they were shunned. The support networks that do exist are often run by volunteers who are themselves former Amish, creating the risk of secondary trauma as helpers try to support others while managing their own ongoing recovery. The geographical isolation of many Amish communities also complicates the healing process for those who leave. Unlike people who leave other religious groups, former Amish often can't simply move across town to avoid reminders of their past. They may need to relocate hundreds of miles away to find employment opportunities that match their limited education and work experience. This geographical displacement adds another layer of loss and disorientation to an already overwhelming transition. Yet despite all these challenges, many former Amish not only survive but thrive in their new lives. They develop resilience, independence, and strength that serves them well in facing life's inevitable difficulties. They often become advocates for others facing similar struggles, using their hard-won wisdom to help people escape manipulative situations and build healthy lives. They proved that it's possible to overcome even the most comprehensive systems of control and manipulation when someone has the courage to seek something better. The success stories of former Amish individuals reveal common themes that offer hope to others considering similar escapes. Education emerges as a crucial factor in successful transitions. Those who manage to continue their schooling, whether through formal programs or self-directed learning, generally fare better than those who remain limited by their 8th grade Amish education. Education doesn't just provide job skills, it develops critical thinking abilities and exposes people to different ways of understanding the world. Healthy relationships also play a vital role in recovery from Amish backgrounds. Former Amish who manage to form friendships and romantic partnerships with people who accept them unconditionally often heal more quickly from the trauma of family rejection. These relationships provide models for love and acceptance that aren't based on conformity or performance, helping former Amish learn that they're worthy of love simply for being themselves.
Community involvement, whether through churches, volunteer organizations, or professional associations, helps former Amish rebuild the sense of belonging that was destroyed when they were shunned. While they may never fully replace the tight-knit community they lost, they can create new networks of support and friendship that provide many of the same benefits without the coercive control. Perhaps most importantly, successful former Amish individuals learn to trust their own judgment and intuition. Having spent their formative years being told that their thoughts, feelings, and desires were wrong or sinful, they must consciously develop confidence in their own ability to make good decisions. This process often takes years and may require professional counseling, but it's essential for building truly independent and fulfilling lives. The courage required to escape Amish communities shouldn't be underestimated. These aren't people making casual lifestyle changes or exploring different career options. They're individuals who choose to sacrifice everything they've ever known and everyone they've ever loved for the possibility of freedom and self-determination. They face not only practical challenges, but also the constant fear that they've made a terrible mistake, that they've condemned themselves to eternal punishment, and that they'll never find the happiness and fulfillment they sought. Some don't make it, The combination of practical struggles, emotional trauma, and social isolation proves too overwhelming for some former Amish individuals. They may return to their communities, often deeply damaged by their experience in the outside world, and facing years of suspicion and reduced status within the community. Others struggle with addiction, mental illness, or other serious problems that stem directly from the trauma of their transition and the complete loss of their support systems. The most tragic cases involve former Amish who take their own lives, unable to bear the weight of losing everything they once held dear while struggling to build something meaningful from nothing. These deaths are rarely discussed openly within Amish communities, where suicide is seen as the ultimate sin and evidence of spiritual failure. But they represent the ultimate cost of a system that forces people to choose between authentic selfhood and family connection, between personal growth and community belonging. Yet for every tragic story, there are others that demonstrate the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the power of hope to overcome even the most overwhelming obstacles. These are the stories that give meaning to the suffering and sacrifice that escape requires. Stories that prove that freedom and authenticity are worth fighting for, even when the cost seems impossible to bear. Consider the story of David, who left his Amish community in Wisconsin at the age of 19 with dreams of becoming a doctor. Unlike Mark or Sarah, David came from a relatively progressive Amish family that had allowed him to work part-time for a non-Amish veterinarian during his teenage years. This exposure to medical knowledge and modern technology planted seeds of ambition that his community couldn't contain.
David's escape was more carefully planned than most. He had managed to save nearly $1,000 from his veterinary work, and he had secretly obtained his birth certificate and social security card. He had even made contact with a former Amish man who had successfully transitioned to mainstream society and was willing to provide guidance and temporary housing. By Amish escape standards, David was remarkably well prepared for his transition. Even with this preparation, David's first years outside the community were filled with challenges that nearly broke his resolve. The academic preparation required to qualify for college, let alone medical school, seemed insurmountable when he was starting with an 8th grade education. He spent 2 years working full-time while attending night classes to earn his high school equivalency, then another 4 years working his way through community college to prepare for university. The loneliness was often worse than the academic struggles. David would lie awake at night wondering what his younger brothers were doing, whether his parents thought about him, whether his childhood friends missed him or had forgotten he ever existed. He attended his grandmother's funeral from a distance, standing behind trees at the cemetery to watch his family grieve without being able to comfort them or receive comfort from them. But David also discovered joys and satisfactions that his Amish life could never have provided. The first time he successfully diagnosed an illness in a patient during his medical training, he felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that justified every sacrifice he had made. The day he graduated from medical school, he thought about his parents' teachings about pride and worldly achievement and realized that using his God-given abilities to heal people was the most spiritual work he could imagine. Today, David practices emergency medicine in a major hospital, saving lives and relieving suffering in ways that would have been impossible if he had remained in his Amish community. He has built a new family with colleagues and friends who accept him completely, and he has found deep satisfaction in mentoring other former Amish individuals who are pursuing their own dreams of higher education and professional success. Yet David still carries the scars of his escape. He is never married, partly because he struggles with trust and intimacy after being abandoned by everyone who claimed to love him unconditionally. He experiences periodic bouts of depression and anxiety, especially around holidays when the absence of his birth family feels most acute. He sometimes wonders if the cost of his freedom was too high, whether he might have found a way to be content with a simpler life that didn't require such devastating losses. These ongoing struggles illustrate an important truth about escaping the Amish. Healing isn't a destination, but a lifelong process. Even the most successful former Amish individuals carried permanent scars from their experiences. The trauma of family rejection, cultural displacement, and forced independence doesn't simply disappear once someone builds a successful career or forms healthy relationships. It becomes part of who they are, a constant reminder of both their losses and their strength.
The impact of these escapes extends beyond the individuals who leave. Every person who successfully builds a life outside the Amish world becomes a living contradiction to community teachings about the impossibility of happiness beyond their boundaries. Their very existence challenges the narrative that the Amish way is the only path to fulfillment and spiritual salvation. This is why former Amish individuals are so thoroughly shunned and their stories so systematically suppressed. It's not enough for the community to simply disapprove of their choices. Their success must be denied, their happiness dismissed as shallow and temporary, their achievements attributed to pride and worldly corruption. The alternative would be to admit that the community's control systems are based on fear and manipulation rather than genuine spiritual wisdom. The children and young adults within Amish communities are carefully shielded from knowledge of former Amish members. They're told stories about former Amish who failed, struggled, or came to bad ends, but they rarely hear about those who have thrived. This selective information sharing maintains the community's narrative about the dangers of leaving, while preventing young people from seeing positive examples of alternative life paths. When word does leak back about former members' successes, it's often accompanied by dismissive commentary designed to minimize its impact. David's medical career might be acknowledged, but dismissed as meaningless worldly achievement that has left him spiritually empty. Sarah's nursing work might be recognized, but characterized as prideful ambition that has cost her eternal salvation. The goal is to ensure that no success story is compelling enough to inspire others to consider similar escapes. This information warfare becomes particularly intense when former Amish individuals achieve public recognition or media attention. Their communities work actively to discredit them, questioning their motives, their character, and their right to speak about their experiences. They're portrayed as bitter ex-members seeking revenge rather than individuals sharing their truth to help others in similar situations. The silencing efforts extend to legal intimidation and social pressure on anyone who might provide platforms for former Amish voices. Publishers, journalists, and documentary filmmakers who show interest in former Amish stories often receive pressure from Amish communities and their allies to avoid or minimize coverage. The goal is to ensure that the dominant narrative about Amish life remains the sanitized, romanticized version that attracts tourism and sympathy, rather than the complex reality that includes systematic abuse and family destruction. Despite these efforts at suppression, technology and changing social attitudes have made it increasingly difficult for Amish communities to completely control information about life after leaving. Social media platforms allow former Amish to connect with each other and share their stories directly, bypassing traditional gatekeepers who might be influenced by community pressure.
The internet has been particularly transformative for Amish young people who are questioning their faith and considering their options. Secret access to online resources allows them to research educational opportunities, job training programs, and support services that previous generations never knew existed. They can read accounts from other former Amish individuals and realize that successful transitions are possible, even if they're never mentioned within their communities.
This technological revolution has created something that Amish communities have never had to face before: informed resistance. Young people who are considering leaving now have access to practical information about how to prepare for the transition, what resources are available to help them, and what realistic outcomes they might expect. They can make decisions based on complete information rather than the fear-based propaganda they receive within their communities. The response from Amish leadership has been predictably defensive. Technology restrictions have become even more stringent in many communities, with severe punishments for anyone caught accessing prohibited websites or communication platforms. Surveillance of young people has increased, with parents and community members encouraged to monitor each other for signs of dangerous outside influence. But the technological genie can't be completely contained, especially as smartphones and internet access become ubiquitous in mainstream society. Even the most isolated Amish communities have contact with non-Amish neighbors, employers, and service providers who carry these devices. Young Amish people working in construction, farming, or other jobs that involve non-Amish colleagues inevitably encounter technology and the broader world it represents. The increasing awareness of options and resources has led to changes in how escapes occur and who attempts them. Earlier generations of former Amish typically left with no preparation, no support, and no understanding of what they would face. Contemporary escapees are more likely to have done research, made connections with support organizations, and developed basic plans for their transitions. This preparation doesn't eliminate the challenges of leaving, but it does improve success rates and reduce some of the most devastating aspects of the transition. Former Amish who enter the mainstream world with some understanding of basic systems and available resources are less likely to become victims of exploitation or to give up and return to their communities out of desperation. The increased success rates have not gone unnoticed within Amish communities, leading to increasingly desperate efforts to prevent escapes and discredit those who do leave. Some communities have implemented what amounts to internal surveillance systems, with members encouraged to report on each other's activities, associations, and expressions of doubt. Young people who show signs of questioning or resistance may be subjected to intensive intervention designed to break their will before they can plan an escape.
These intervention techniques often involve public humiliation, isolation from peers, increased work responsibilities designed to prevent independent thinking, and intensive religious counseling that amounts to psychological manipulation. The goal is to create such fear and desperation that young people abandon any thoughts of leaving and commit completely to community life out of learned helplessness rather than genuine conviction. The escalating control measures have had an unintended consequence. They've made life within Amish communities increasingly uncomfortable and restrictive for everyone, not just those considering escape. Families live in constant fear that their children might be influenced by outside ideas. Parents monitor their children's every interaction and expression. The atmosphere of suspicion and surveillance has eroded much of the community harmony and trust that was supposed to be one of the benefits of Amish life. Some former Amish report that the communities they left have become significantly more controlling and fearful than the ones their parents or grandparents knew. The pressure of maintaining isolation in an increasingly connected world has led to a kind of siege mentality, where any contact with outside ideas is seen as dangerous contamination. This has created internal tensions between older community members who remember a somewhat more relaxed atmosphere and younger leaders who believe that extreme measures are necessary to preserve Amish identity. These internal conflicts sometimes create opportunities for those planning to escape. Family members who are uncomfortable with increasing restrictions may be more willing to provide subtle assistance or to look the other way when suspicious activities occur. Community divisions may create distractions that allow escapees more time to implement their plans without detection. However, the increasingly restrictive atmosphere has also made the consequences of failed escape attempts more severe. Young people who are caught planning to leave or who attempt unsuccessfully to escape often face punishments that amount to psychological torture. They may be completely isolated from their peers, subjected to constant supervision, or required to perform public confessions and demonstrations of repentance that destroy their remaining dignity and self-respect. The severity of these punishments serves as a warning to others who might be considering similar actions, but it also demonstrates the lengths to which Amish communities will go to maintain control over their members. The willingness to psychologically abuse their own children in the name of religious obedience reveals priorities that contradict their public image as loving, family-centered communities.
For those who do successfully escape, despite increasing restrictions and surveillance, the trauma of leaving has become even more complex. They must deal not only with the loss of family and community, but also with the knowledge that their escape may have resulted in increased restrictions and punishments for those they left behind. Many former Amish struggle with guilt over the possibility that their younger siblings or friends are suffering greater control and surveillance because of their decision to leave. This additional layer of psychological burden can complicate the healing process and make it more difficult for former Amish to build healthy new lives. They may feel responsible for problems within their former communities and question whether their personal freedom was worth the cost to others. Some become advocates and activists specifically to help reduce the suffering of those still trapped within restrictive communities, channeling their guilt and concern into productive action. The advocacy work performed by former Amish individuals has become increasingly important as public awareness of their experiences has grown. They serve as crucial bridges between their former communities and the outside world, providing insights that help law enforcement, social services, and legal advocates understand the unique challenges facing Amish individuals who need help or protection. Former Amish advocates have been instrumental in exposing cases of abuse, educational neglect, and other serious problems within Amish communities that might otherwise remain hidden. Their insider knowledge allows them to identify situations that appear normal to outsiders, but actually represent serious violations of children's rights or adults' freedoms. They can also help authorities understand the cultural context that makes intervention challenging and develop approaches that are more likely to be effective. The advocacy work extends to providing direct assistance to those planning or attempting escapes. Former Amish individuals and their allies operate informal networks that provide information, temporary housing, job placement assistance, and emotional support to those transitioning out of Amish communities. These networks operate largely through word of mouth and personal connections, staying under the radar of community authorities who would work to shut them down if they could identify them. The Underground Railroad aspect of modern Amish escape networks reflects both the continued need for such assistance and the ongoing efforts by Amish communities to prevent their members from accessing help. Like the historical Underground Railroad that helped enslaved people escape bondage, these modern networks must operate in secrecy to protect both those seeking help and those providing it from retaliation
and interference.
The existence of these support networks has fundamentally changed the landscape of Amish escape. While leaving still requires enormous courage and involves significant risks and losses, it no longer means completely starting over with no assistance or guidance. The knowledge that help is available, even if it must be sought carefully and secretly, provides hope and practical resources that make escape seem more feasible to those considering it. This change has had a profound impact on the psychology of young Amish people who are questioning their faith or feeling trapped by community restrictions. Previous generations often felt completely alone in their doubts and saw no possible alternatives to submission or exile. Contemporary young Amish people may still feel isolated within their communities, but they increasingly understand that they're not alone in questioning the system and that successful alternatives exist. The growing awareness of escape possibilities has created what might be called a crisis of legitimacy within some Amish communities. When a system is based on the premise that no reasonable alternatives exist, the demonstration that viable alternatives are available and being successfully pursued undermines the entire foundation of control. Community leaders who once confidently proclaimed that leaving would result in certain misery and failure now face the challenge of explaining why so many former members are thriving in the outside world. The response has been to double down on fear-based messaging, while simultaneously working to limit access to information about successful former members. But this approach faces inherent limitations in an age of global communication and increasing social mobility. Complete information control becomes more difficult each year, and the gap between official community narratives and observable reality becomes harder to maintain. Some Amish communities have begun acknowledging this challenge by making modest reforms designed to reduce the pressure for escape while maintaining essential control mechanisms. These might include allowing slightly more education, permitting limited use of certain technologies for business purposes, or reducing the severity of shunning for minor infractions. The goal is to release enough pressure to prevent widespread exodus while maintaining the fundamental power structure that defines Amish society. However, these reforms face resistance from traditionalist elements within Amish communities who view any compromise as dangerous capitulation to worldly influence. The resulting internal debates sometimes create additional stress and division within communities that were already struggling to maintain cohesion in the face of external pressures. Some communities have split over disagreements about how to respond to changing circumstances, creating further instability and uncertainty for members trying to decide their futures.
The evolution of Amish communities in response to escape pressures illustrates the inherent instability of systems based on coercion rather than genuine conviction. When people remain in religious or social groups because they truly believe in the group's values and find fulfillment in its practices, external alternatives pose no real threat. But when membership is maintained primarily through fear, manipulation, and the threat of devastating consequences for leaving, the mere existence of successful alternatives becomes an existential challenge to the group's survival. This dynamic helps explain why Amish communities work so hard to discredit former members and suppress information about successful escapes. It's not simply about maintaining their reputation or protecting their privacy. It's about preserving a narrative that's essential to maintaining control over current members. If young Amish people fully understood that leaving their communities could lead to happy, fulfilling lives rather than certain disaster, many more would be willing to make that choice. The stakes in this information war are enormous for both sides.
For Amish communities, maintaining control over the narrative about life after leaving is crucial to preventing widespread exodus that could threaten their very existence. For former Amish advocates, sharing accurate information about both the challenges and possibilities of escape is essential to helping trapped individuals make informed decisions about their lives. The broader implications of these stories extend far beyond Amish communities themselves. They raise fundamental questions about the rights of individuals versus the rights of communities, about the proper role of religious authority in personal decision-making, and about society's responsibility to protect those who are trapped in systems that deny them basic freedoms and dignity. In a society that values both religious freedom and individual liberty, how should we respond to religious communities that use their freedom to deny freedom to their own members? What obligations do we have to protect children who are being systematically isolated from information and opportunities that might allow them to make different choices about their lives? How can we balance respect for different cultural values with concern for basic human rights and dignity? These questions become even more complex when we consider that many Amish individuals do genuinely find fulfillment and happiness within their communities. The system that seems oppressive and manipulative to those who leave may feel safe, supportive, and meaningful to those who stay. Not everyone who questions Amish restrictions necessarily wants to leave, and not everyone who stays does so only because they're afraid to go. This complexity makes it difficult to develop simple policy responses or moral judgments about Amish communities and the individuals who choose to leave them. The reality is that any system that denies people access to information and alternatives will inevitably trap some individuals who might prefer different choices if they were fully informed about their options. At the same time, any system that provides complete freedom of choice will inevitably be destabilizing for communities that depend on conformity and shared commitment for their survival. The stories of former Amish individuals force us to confront these difficult tensions between individual freedom and community stability, between personal growth and traditional values, between the right to choose and the right to preserve distinctive ways of life. They remind us that behind every abstract discussion of religious liberty and cultural preservation are real human beings making impossible choices about their identities, their relationships, and their futures. Perhaps most importantly, these stories demonstrate the incredible resilience and courage of individuals who refuse to accept that their current circumstances must define their entire lives. They show us what's possible when people are willing to sacrifice security for authenticity, comfort for growth, and acceptance for the right to think and choose for themselves. The former Amish men and women whose stories we've shared tonight have paid an enormous price for their freedom. They've lost families, communities, cultural identities, and the comfort of never having to question fundamental beliefs about life and purpose. In exchange, they've gained the right to pursue education, careers, relationships, and spiritual paths that reflect their authentic selves rather than the expectations of religious authorities. Not everyone would consider that trade worthwhile. Not everyone has the temperament, resources, or circumstances that make such dramatic changes possible or desirable. But for those who do feel called to seek something beyond the boundaries of their birth communities, these stories provide both inspiration and practical guidance about what such journeys actually involve.
The courage displayed by former Amish individuals in rebuilding their lives from nothing serves as a reminder that human beings are capable of adapting to almost any circumstances when they have strong enough motivation. Their willingness to start over completely rather than accept lives that felt inauthentic demonstrate the power of hope and determination to overcome even the most overwhelming obstacles. Their stories also reveal the importance of community and support systems in human flourishing. The devastating impact of shunning on former Amish individuals highlights how much we all depend on relationships and social connections for our emotional well-being. At the same time, the success of those who manage to build new support networks shows that community doesn't have to be based on conformity and control to be meaningful and supportive.
The development of these support networks also demonstrates how technology and changing social attitudes can create new possibilities for people trapped in restrictive situations. The internet has made it possible for former Amish individuals to find each other, share resources, and coordinate assistance in ways that would have been impossible in previous generations. Social media platforms allow them to maintain connections and build communities despite geographical separation. At the same time, technology has made it more difficult for Amish communities to maintain complete information control over their members. Young Amish people who are questioning their circumstances now have access to perspectives and resources that their parents and grandparents never knew existed. This access doesn't make leaving any less difficult or traumatic, but it does make informed decision-making more possible. The increasing visibility of former Amish stories has also contributed to greater public awareness of the challenges they face and the support they need. Media coverage, documentaries, books, and online content have helped educate mainstream society about the unique difficulties involved in transitioning from highly isolated religious communities to modern life. This awareness has led to increased support for organizations that assist former Amish individuals and greater understanding from employers, educators, and service providers who encounter them. However, increased visibility has also brought increased resistance from Amish communities who view media attention as an attack on their way of life. The tension between former Amish individuals' desire to share their stories and their former community's desire to maintain privacy and control creates ongoing conflicts that complicate recovery processes and support efforts. These conflicts highlight the ongoing nature of the trauma experienced by former Amish individuals. Unlike other forms of trauma that involve discrete events or time periods, the trauma of leaving Amish communities is continually refreshed through ongoing shunning, community hostility, and the permanent loss of family relationships. Former Amish individuals must find ways to heal and move forward while dealing with losses that never fully resolve. The permanence of these losses distinguishes the former Amish experience from other types of religious or cultural transitions. People who leave other religious communities may face disapproval or conflict with their families, but complete and permanent shunning is relatively rare outside of the most extreme groups. The absolute nature of Amish shunning practices creates unique challenges for healing and recovery that require specialized understanding and support approaches. Mental health professionals who work with former Amish individuals have had to develop new therapeutic approaches that address the complex combination of religious trauma, cultural displacement, family rejection, and practical life skills deficits that characterize this population. Traditional counseling methods designed for mainstream American clients often fail to address the unique needs and backgrounds of former Amish individuals. The development of specialized therapeutic approaches for former Amish individuals has contributed to improved outcomes and success rates for those who seek professional help during their transitions. Therapists who understand the cultural context and specific trauma patterns involved in leaving Amish communities are better able to provide effective treatment and support. However, access to specialized mental health services remains limited for many former Amish individuals, particularly those in rural areas or those without adequate health insurance or financial resources. The geographic isolation that characterizes many Amish communities also means that former members may need to travel significant distances to access appropriate professional help. The ongoing development of support resources and therapeutic approaches for former Amish individuals represents a work in progress that continues to evolve as more people leave their communities and as service providers gain experience working with this unique population. Each new wave of former Amish individuals benefits from the accumulated knowledge and resources developed by those who came before them. This cumulative learning process has created what might be called a legacy of escape that extends far beyond individual success stories. Each former Amish person who successfully builds a new life contributes to a growing body of knowledge and resources that makes future escapes more feasible and successful. Their experiences become part of an informal curriculum that helps others navigate similar transitions. The legacy aspect of former Amish experiences highlights the interconnected nature of their stories. While each individual's journey is unique, they all build on and contribute to a collective narrative of resistance, resilience, and recovery. This collective dimension provides meaning and purpose to individual struggles, transforming personal trauma into community wisdom that benefits others facing similar challenges. The sense of purpose that comes from helping others often becomes a crucial element in the healing process for former Amish individuals. Many report that their most meaningful and satisfying activities involve supporting others who are considering or attempting similar escapes. This service work provides validation for their own difficult choices and transforms their painful experiences into resources for helping others. The advocacy and support work performed by former Amish individuals creates a positive feedback loop that strengthens both individual recovery and community resources. As more people successfully transition out of Amish communities, more experienced mentors and supporters become available to help those who follow. This expanding network of support increases success rates and reduces the isolation that has historically made leaving Amish communities so traumatic. The growth of support networks and resources has also led to increased sophistication in escape planning and execution. Contemporary individuals considering leaving Amish communities have access to detailed practical guidance about everything from obtaining identification documents to finding temporary housing to accessing educational and employment opportunities. This preparation significantly improves their chances of successful transitions. However, the improved preparation and support available to potential escapees has also led to increased vigilance and control measures within Amish communities. The arms race between those seeking to leave and those trying to prevent them from leaving has intensified over time, with both sides developing more sophisticated strategies and resources. This escalating conflict reflects the fundamental incompatibility between systems based on individual freedom and choice and systems based on community control and conformity. As long as some Amish individuals desire alternatives to their traditional lifestyle, and as long as their communities are committed to preventing such alternatives, tension and conflict will continue.
The resolution of this tension may ultimately depend on broader social and legal changes that affect the balance between individual rights and community authority. Court decisions, legislative actions, and cultural shifts that strengthen protections for individual freedom of choice could make it more difficult for Amish communities to maintain their current levels of control over their members. Alternatively, changes that emphasize religious freedom and community rights could strengthen the ability of Amish communities to maintain their distinctive practices, even when those practices restrict individual choices. The ultimate outcome will likely depend on how society chooses to balance competing values and interests. Regardless of how these broader tensions are resolved, the individuals whose stories we've shared tonight have already made their choices and begun building their new lives. Their courage in choosing authenticity over security, growth over comfort, and individual freedom over community belonging has created possibilities not only for themselves, but for others who may follow in their footsteps. Their stories remind us that human beings have an incredible capacity for adaptation, resilience, and growth when they're motivated by genuine conviction and supported by caring communities. They also remind us of the enormous cost of systems that deny people the right to think, choose, and grow according to their own conscience and capabilities. Most importantly, their stories demonstrate that change is possible, that seemingly impossible circumstances can be overcome, and that the human spirit's desire for freedom and authenticity is stronger than even the most comprehensive systems of control and manipulation. They prove that no matter how isolated, controlled, or hopeless someone's situation may seem, there are always alternatives for those who are brave enough to seek them.
The terrifying journey out of Amish communities is ultimately a journey toward hope, toward the possibility of living according to one's authentic self rather than the expectations of others. It's a journey that requires enormous courage, involves devastating losses, and offers no guarantees of success or happiness. But for those who feel called to make that journey, it also offers something that staying behind cannot provide: the chance to discover who they really are when they're free to choose their own path. Tonight, we've shared the stories of Sarah, Mark, Rebecca, and David, 4 individuals among thousands who have made the choice to leave everything behind for the possibility of something better. Their stories are unique, but they're also part of a larger narrative about human freedom, dignity, and the right to choose one's own destiny. These stories continue to unfold every day as new individuals face the same impossible choice between security and freedom, belonging and authenticity, family approval and personal growth. Some will choose to stay, finding ways to live with restrictions and limitations that feel unbearable to others. Some will choose to leave, accepting the terrible cost of exile for the chance to build lives that reflect their true selves. Whatever choice they make, they deserve our respect, our understanding, and our support. Those who stay deserve protection from abuse and exploitation, access to information that allows for informed decision-making, and recognition of their basic human dignity. Those who leave deserve assistance in building new lives, healing from trauma, and contributing to the broader community that becomes their new home. The stories of former Amish individuals challenge us to think more deeply about freedom, community, family, and faith. They force us to confront difficult questions about the price of authenticity and the cost of belonging. They remind us that behind every abstract discussion of religious liberty and cultural preservation are real human beings making choices that will define the rest of their lives. These are not just stories about escaping the Amish. They are stories about the fundamental human struggle between conformity and individuality, between security and growth, between the comfort of certainty and the challenge of freedom. They are stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage when faced with impossible choices. They are stories about the power of hope to overcome even the most overwhelming obstacles. They are ultimately stories about what it means to be human in a world where freedom and belonging sometimes seem mutually exclusive, where choosing to be authentic can mean losing everything else that matters. They remind us that being human sometimes requires making choices that seem impossible, and that having the courage to make those choices is what allows both individuals and societies to grow and change. As we close tonight's exploration of these remarkable stories, we're left not with simple answers, but with deeper questions about how we can create communities that nurture both individual growth and collective belonging. How we can preserve valuable traditions while allowing for personal choice, and how we can support those who choose difficult paths toward authenticity and freedom. The men and women whose stories we've shared have given us the gift of their truth, their courage, and their hope. They've shown us that no matter how powerful the forces that seek to control and limit human potential, the human spirit's desire for freedom and authentic self-expression will always find a way to emerge. Their terrifying journey out of one world and into another continues to inspire and challenge all of us to think more deeply about what it means to live with courage, authenticity, and hope.